Hello everyone, I'm Wendell Jones and welcome to this edition of The Platform. On this program we examine the national issues of the Bahamas and sometimes international issues. And on our program today we are going to be talking about a success story in medicine in the Bahamas, in the field of medicine. And our guest on the program is an award-winning physician. He is making his mark not only here in the Bahamas but throughout the Caribbean, and well respected in the United States of America. Dr. Conville Brown owns the medical pavilion here in New Providence, the medical pavilion in Antigua, Sunrise Medical Center in Grand Bahama, and his organization is celebrating its 26th anniversary. And so he is doing extremely well as a medical practitioner, and it's our pleasure to have him as our guest on the program. Dr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for
pleasure
being
to be here with you.
And congratulations on yet another anniversary.
It's another year, starting to get old.
Absolutely. It seemed as it was only a few months ago that you celebrated your Silver Jubilee.
Exactly, July 1st of last year,
Yes.
2015, yes.
For starters, I know a whole lot of people know your story well, and the successes that you've had. But in addition to being a medical doctor, you have an entrepreneurial drive.
I think so, and probably out of necessity. I think when I returned home, one of the things that I fully expected to do was to return home in any event, having trained abroad in Canada, Jamaica, and then the U.S., and it was always my intention to return home. So it was just a bit of a surprise when I did return home to find that the infrastructure that one needs to practice cardiology, for example, and take care of patients with heart disease was really somewhat lacking in the country. And I could have done like a number of predecessors had done, which is jump back on the plane and go back to the States, the U.S. or Canada, sorry, the States, Canada, or the UK, or Europe, or the UK, and practice there because the infrastructure is already in place, and then you can really enjoy your profession. I chose to stay home, and then the question then was how to go about getting that infrastructure in place, and we could have waited for the government to do so, and that might have taken a little more time than I was prepared to wait, and so we then looked to do this through personal and private investments.
You come from humble beginnings, and I'd like for Bahamians and our viewers and listeners to have an appreciation on your trajectory, where your antecedents, before we go into how you came to build such a wonderful institution here in the Bahamas. You're from Ridgeland Park, aren't you?
From Ridgeland Park, but my mother is from Long Island.
Yes.
Grew up in Kemp Road in and then when I was born, we were in Pinedale, and then moved to Ridgeland Park from Pinedale, and our family home is still in Ridgeland Park, and of course I have now moved a little further north of Ridgeland Park, but other than that, I'm an over-the-hill boy.
Yes, and you went to government high school.
Absolutely. The government high school.
The government high school. Yes. Was it still the government high school when you went there?
Actually, we were probably the last class of the government high school.
Okay.
My understanding, and it may have gone on for yet another year, but my understanding was that in '75, that's when the College of the Bahamas was meant to start. Ergo, the end of the government high school, as it was.
Right.
And then it would have shifted to, I guess you call that Yellow Elder?
Yes.
Close to Yellow Elder.
Right. So you finished at Yellow Elder?
No. I was at Government High, and at the present College of the Bahamas, at that campus, which was the original campus. And then in '75, we ought to have gone on to do advanced levels, GCE A levels, if you remember those.
Right, yes.
And that's a 2-year program. So we never got an opportunity to do A levels. So most of my colleagues, I think, went on to College of the Bahamas, and I knew I had this long road ahead of me to do medicine and specialize. And so I decided that maybe I don't want to take that route, and let me see if I could enter the other set of training a bit earlier. And so I actually ended up at Acadia University at the age of 16, because I still had milk around my around my mouth, and ended up at Acadia University for 1 year. Subsequently transferred to Dalhousie for 2, and then entered medicine earlier than was intended.
So you spent a whole lot of time in cold Canada.
In cold Canada, 3 years, and that was an experience. Let's put it that way.
But you always knew that you wanted to be a cardiologist.
I actually, to be honest, I actually wanted to do cardiac surgery, but to come back home in the Bahamas and plan to do cardiac surgery if there is no cardiology service would be foolhardy. And so I was determined to come home. So I then took the notch, what I consider a notch. Dwayne Sands would think it's, now he's speaking the truth, take a notch back or a step back, and did cardiology instead of cardiac surgery. And because I fully intended to come home, and there was no sense coming home with a space program or with a rocket if you don't have a space program. So to come and do cardiac surgery and you don't have a cardiology service as the base is nonsensical.
Many physicians came back home and they simply practiced in the hospitals that we have here, and some went into private practice. You decided that you would do all of these things. You were practicing in our hospitals, but you decided that you are going big. What inspired you?
Well, I think it was, the key thing, you know, is I had, at the time I came home in 1990, I had already spent 15 years of my then 31 years away in training, okay? And this is after government high. And I spent all that time to be able to develop my profession in terms of general medicine, internal medicine, and cardiology, and to be able to come home and not be able to practice at the level at which I had become accustomed to during my training just did not sync with me at all. And like I said, I could have just jumped back on the plane and say, hey, you know, it's nice to come home, say hello to your family, go back, get a job in Florida or New York City, and live the life, and so on and so forth. But I wanted to make a contribution home, number one, and two, my family had made tremendous sacrifices for me to go off to school. Because like you said, we're from humble beginnings, we're not a rich family, rich with love, but not with finances. And so I was determined to come back home. In fact, I even delayed getting married for over 10 years because I felt my obligations were to my family before I could go outside of my nuclear family.
And when you came back, you were one of the few cardiologists in the Bahamas.
I was one of 2 at the time,
Yes.
And if you include Dr. Cecil Bethel, who I consider the grandfather of cardiology,
Okay.
then there would have been Dr. Saratopoulos and then myself.
Okay. And you decided that you were going to first, in terms of building a business. I'm not talking about running a private practice now. Do Sunrise in Freeport, is that your first entrepreneurial exploit?
No, I think my first entrepreneurial exploit would have been in the development of the Heart Center itself, because I wanted to make sure that I could function professionally at a level that would satisfy me, give me professional gratification, not from a financial perspective, but from the perspective of just being able to practice what you had learned. Because otherwise you could find it terribly frustrating, for example, to be a surgeon and come home and there's no operating room. So what are you going to do? So that just becomes terribly frustrating. And I was determined that if it wasn't available, to make it available. And we were able to do this, and we were able to encourage many of our colleagues to do likewise, to personally invest in their career and in the infrastructure to allow them to practice at the level at which they had become accustomed to in their training, so that they could offer a greater expanse of services to our Bahamian population, so that not everybody has to jump on a plane and fly. But if you can't do that, then everybody has to fly or suffer in the absence of being able to do so.
So if you drove Collins Avenue or walk it, you would see an institution. You would see some buildings. I believe you bought several buildings.
1 or 2, yeah.
1 or 2. I told someone the other day that as a boy, I walked that area, and there were these very well-appointed residences along Collins Avenue. You had some Bahamian physicians who decided that they are going to turn these houses into medical facilities. Some of them were demolished.
Yep.
So you demolished a couple and you built around them, eh?
Well, interestingly, we started out as a 1,200 square foot house that was actually owned by my very first patient when I came home, who shall remain nameless, of course, and he's now unfortunately deceased. But so we bought the house with a view to establishing it as a private practice arena. It's only 1,200 square feet, and as you know, with cardiology, there's lots of equipment and so on. So we immediately had to think in terms of expanding it. The long and short of it is that we have since then acquired a number of other properties around, and so one 1,200 square foot house became a 10,000 square foot facility, and then you added 2 other surrounding houses at about 1,200 each, because they were literally identical. And so now the medical pavilion, as it is called now, we couldn't just call it the Heart Center, because we changed the name to the Chest Center when Dr. Sands indicated that he wished to join, and it was just a wonderful opportunity to have cardiology and cardiac surgery under the same roof and working as an integrated service, independent but integrated. So we were very happy to introduce that concept to the entire Caribbean, actually, and even in the US, cardiac surgeons and cardiologists did not exactly live together. You know what I'm saying? They weren't in the same complex. So we were happy to be able to do that. And that quote-unquote marriage lasted literally 17 years until he decided he would enter other arenas, as you might well be aware.
Yes.
And so we did this, and in bringing them all together, we ended up with 3 1,200 square foot houses, one of which was demolished, and we ended up now with a 40,000 plus square foot facility, and still growing as we develop other services to accommodate our Bahamian population.
I had a conversation with someone today, and we were talking about physicians, and the point was being made that a physician is really a scientist. You're a scientist. And scientists sometimes, well, most of the times, aren't good businessmen. That you're a scientist and not necessarily a good businessman. You've been able to marry them. You are a scientist and, of course, a very outstanding businessman in our community, because in addition to doing cardiology, you are doing a variety of things in that pavilion on Collins Avenue. Describe to our public exactly what you're doing, the number of services that you offer.
Well, I think the general idea was that we really wanted to be able to bring to our Bahamas the best of the best. And you don't want it scattered all over the place. So if you have to go down that street to get an x-ray, jump back in your car, drive 5 miles to get an EKG, jump back in your car, go another 2 miles to get your blood drawn, that could become a taxing enterprise on a patient who already has enough anxieties already. So we really wanted to develop a concept where we had all of the services under one roof. And that was the initial thing for cardiology, hence why it was called the Bahamas Heart Center in the first instance. When we were able to expand it to the Chest Center, or when we had to expand it to the Chest Center, it was to make sure we included all the chest physicians. So we actually had the cardiac surgeon, the cardiac anesthetist, we had the pediatric cardiologist, we even had the pulmonologist, the lung specialist, as in Dr. Kevin Moss. And so we had all of these specialists. So for you to enter our complex as a tenant physician specialist, you had to be a specialist between the neck and the navel. Below that, we didn't have space. Above the neck, we didn't have space. In between, we could find you some space, okay? So we kept it confined to the chest area. And then subsequently, Dr. Robin Roberts and some other colleagues suggested that we should develop some cancer services locally, and that's how the cancer service got started. I had no interest in cancer, despite the fact that Dr. Sinqui is the first pediatric hematologist oncologist in the Caribbean, and in the Bahamas, of course. But I offered to develop a cancer center for her up front, and she said no. She'll just stick to the practice.
Yes.
And
we get to our public to understand that Dr. Sinqui is really your wife.
Yes. No, well, I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. And it kind of takes certain things for granted. And so when Robin came up with this idea of expanding the cancer service, of course, as he presented it to me, I said, well, you know, we really can't just do this for prostate, because we have a lot of women with breast cancer, a lot of people with colon cancer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to develop a cancer service, not just a prostate service. And that's how we ended up going now from what probably would have been a $250,000 investment to a $15 million investment for the cancer center. And we offered the participation to all of the physicians in the Bahamas, both in the private sector and the government sector. If you were practicing unlicensed, then you're offered the opportunity to participate. And so that's how we ended up having to change the name from the Chess Center to the Medical Pavilion. It was called the Centerville Medical Pavilion at the time. And since we thought we might end up outside of the country as well, we then changed the name to the Medical Pavilion, Bahamas.
So this is a medical conglomerate that you operate?
Yeah, it's like a medical mall, so to say.
Medical mall.
Oh, yeah, almost like a medical mall with quite a few independent services, quite a few that we would have started as well, and quite a few that we do in partnership with other specialists.
What support did you receive from the government of the Bahamas in accomplishing such a medical feat? Because it is a medical feat. I don't know of any other facility in the Caribbean that is similar to yours.
I think we are somewhat unique, and we've been trying to not be so unique in terms of encouraging others to replicate some of the things that we've done, and not necessarily the way in which we've done it, but with the idea of being able to encourage participation and access by the broader community. From the government's perspective, there were certain services that you would find in a government service that would be your general, primary care, secondary care, tertiary care type level services. You will generally not find an open heart surgical program in a government center. And you can just look around the Caribbean and see how many government programs have a radiation program for cancer. To be in the English-speaking Caribbean, that number is easy. There were only 3 in the last 30 to 40 years, 3. And in the last 10 years, we now have 4 other countries that have brought on private services, and they've elevated the service immediately to what would be considered the contemporaneous state-of-the-art. So Jamaica, with the university hospital there, in fact, it was the university countries, because, you know, Bahamas just joined that realm in the last 10, 15 years, through a lot of the efforts of people like Robin Roberts. And so Jamaica would have been number 1, Trinidad and Barbados, I don't know who came second and third, but those are the other 3. And they all have cobalt units which are essentially obsolete nowadays, but they all have cobalt units in their government hospitals. And then when you use the state-of-the-art linear accelerators, the ones with the big 8-foot thick walls and the fancy expensive machines that we would have set up here in the Bahamas, then you go back to Jamaica again, 1 private unit, Trinidad now with 2, but we led the way with introducing this high-level, state-of-the-art level of care. And we're very, very proud of that, but we also encourage that, listen, if we could do this with 350,000 people, then a place like Trinidad with 1.4 million people, Jamaica with 3 million people, should clearly be able to outdo us. They've been challenged, but they should be able to.
Right.
Yeah. And the good part, I think, at the end of the day, is that we try to make sure that definitely in the Bahamas, and we have what we call partnered care model, and we make sure that whatever we introduce is not just for the rich and famous, but we offer it back to the government. So instead of the government encouraging us, we offer it back to government so that the government can have the quote-unquote poor people of our country, or the less fortunate in our country, have access to high-level advanced services.
Let's take a break here, and when we return, I'd like to talk about some of the equipment that you acquired, because I remember taking a tour some years ago, and you introduced me, you showed me some equipment from GE that the cost was in the millions of dollars. Let's take a break here. This is the platform. We take this break. We'll come right back. We're back here on the platform, and we are speaking with Dr. Conville Brown as his institution on Collins Avenue, the Medical Pavilion. Some call it the Chest Center. I still call it that. Is celebrating its 26th anniversary. And at the break, we were talking about the kind of equipment that you have in that facility. You were able to raise a whole lot of money, millions, to, as they say, outfit that facility. And I asked you earlier on, and this is an opportunity for you to talk about the extent to which you were able to get support from the government of the Bahamas for this.
Well, I think, well, first of all, the government did not give any support financially for setting up these services. And in fact, unfortunately, in some cases, we were challenged to even get the government to indicate a show of support, and I'm not indicating which government, because that's neither here nor there, but to indicate even a show of support for utilizing those services were they to be developed, that the government could give a promise to use the service. Because if you have that, that gives you leverage even to go and raise the financing via the bank or an investor, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, the financing road for us has been a rather tough one, and it has been from inception. Interestingly, when I saw my first private patient in office, it was at the desk of the leader of the opposition, Hubert Minnis, a gynecologist. Okay, he had just opened up Oxford, and it was at his desk in Oxford Medical that I saw my first patient for the first week or two, along with Dr. Robin Roberts, who was his first tenant, and I happened to be the second one, literally in the same week. And in fact, Robin and I shared an office space, a quarter of the complex, for the better part of 3 years, while I then constructed the heart center. And so that was a pretty interesting experience. But just in trying to raise the funding at that time, we actually wanted to start out. I needed about $300,000 to get started. Now, most people who's going to invest that kind of money will invest it in a house, hands down. Nobody even begins to think, and of course, I'm already certified crazy, but nobody even begins to think of investing that kind of money in equipment. Yeah. That's the government's job. Right. That's the job of a doctor's hospital, but not the job of anybody in a private practice arena. But again, who was going to do it? You know, I mean, the government was not going to do it, and Doctors Hospital was not minded to do it at the time.
So you took many risks.
I took several risks, yes.
Several risks,
yes.
Because you showed me a piece of equipment that probably cost more than $1 million.
I remember taking you on that tour, and I would say, this here is the $300,000 room, and this is the $1 million room,
yes.
and this one is the $4 million room.
Yes.
So,
and,
yes.
And you had an MRI machine from GE, I think it was?
Yeah, not an MRI, we had a nuclear machine.
Yes.
Yes, so that, because we were, I think, the second or third to introduce nuclear cardiology. Dr. Liz Darwell, I think, started doing nuclear medicine. No, Dr. Larry Carroll.
Okay.
And then I continued with nuclear cardiology. And at this point in time, we're the only ones that actually run a nuclear medicine and cardiology service.
So you have imaging for everything now?
We do everything except PET scanning, which we'll be doing in Antigua, and an MRI scan, because there's several others on the island already. So we do everything else.
So there is no need for a Bahamian to have to travel to Florida.
That's a matter of choice. The same equipment 9 times out of 10 that you're traveling over there for is already available here in Nassau. And several groups are investing and improving their outputs. Doctors Hospital has done so. There are several private units on the outside as well, with other entrepreneurs. And you know, Wendell, I think we have to appreciate that in developing countries, you will not develop your healthcare sector in terms of advanced services unless the private sector joins in the fray to do so.
And it has to be driven by the private sector.
It has to be driven by the private sector.
Yes.
The government has enough problems making sure we can get vaccinations, that we can get primary care, if there's an accident, that you can have your emergency care, and so on and so forth. They really don't have the resources in a developing country to expand into these arenas, because these arenas are expensive to engage in, but we jump on a plane and fly for them all the time. But if you're going to keep that money in the economy and keep the healthcare within the economy and build local capacity, it really has to come from an alternative source of funding, generally via the private sector.
And the question is the extent to which the government is utilizing the services that you have. Because if you're a public patient and you need these imaging services, then your organization is, or your institution is a place that people should be referred to, right? Well,
you would like to think should be, and I think 26 years later, we can say that we've had a reasonable relationship with the government in terms of making the services available. There's no mandate, but you make the services available. And we do it. We don't just make it available, by the way. So if the service costs $100, generally the government patient is charged $50 via the government. So you don't just walk off the street and say, hey, I'm a government patient, $50. You have to come via Princess Margaret or the RAN.
But they're utilizing your services. That's the point.
Yes, they are for several, and they've increased their capacity for a number of things, and that's good. Okay. That's fine. Okay. But whenever we have services that they don't have, we make sure we offer it back at a discount. Absolutely.
Because I know in the instance of dialysis, there are several private organizations, institutions here doing dialyzing patients. Yes. So you are one of those?
Yeah, we have a dialysis center at the Pavilion that was built by an investment group of physicians and nurses. So it's actually owned by, I was involved with the design and all that sort of stuff and so on, and laid it out and saw to the construction and so on. I enjoy doing that stuff. But the ownership of it is resident amongst a number of physicians and nurses. In fact, the nurses own, in fact, the nurses may actually exceed the physicians in ownership.
Is that right?
Yes. And they're the ones that run the unit, and it's a very well-run unit. It's a state-of-the-art unit. Every patient has his own TV. They can go online on their machine. It's fully digital. I always tell the nurses, we shouldn't be paying y'all because y'all don't have to do any work other than connect the patient, because everything else comes digitally into the computer system. So I always tease them with that. But no, so we're very proud of our state-of-the-art, fully digital dialysis unit. And it's the first one, I think, in North America and in the Caribbean. Because when the equipment came out, the reason we beat the U.S. is when it came out, you know, some equipment is available first in Europe before the FDA allows it in the States. So in that window, we were able to sneak in and be one of the first in the Caribbean to be fully digital. I'm sure there are other units now, but, we still hold that distinction.
You have developed something of a medical cooperative, insofar as you have allowed nurses to participate in ownership of the dialysis facility. Right. There are some other physicians who might be involved in other things that you do.
Yes, absolutely. The cancer center, for example, there must be well over 100 shareholders in the cancer center. And you encourage people to invest what they can afford to invest and what they wish to invest. And if they don't wish to, that's fine too, because then you can just be a user, and hopefully you don't need it. But I always try to encourage people to invest in building our country's capacity.
Yes, you have. In terms of developing, say, a medical facility where there are beds for overnight stay or for people to stay for periods of time, is that in the works?
Well, it's interesting that you asked.
Because I'm talking mini hospital now.
Yeah, and I guess at the time of our anniversary, we were probably in a position to state it, assuming it's not already known. But we're actually in the process right now of outfitting what will be another relatively unique concept, in that, because we like to do things that we think will fit our needs as opposed to just following the status quo. And so we're going to have what we call an ASHIC, A-S-H-I-C, for ambulatory surgical hospital and interventional center. So what does that all mean? It means that we're going to have overnight capability. This is at the Pavilion. It'll be on the 3rd floor. We'll have overnight capability, but we don't want any patients staying in our facility for more than 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. Okay? So your stay has got to be under 24 hours. Okay? Because we're not intended to be a competitor for Princess Margaret or Doctors Hospital. We're going to do minimally invasive surgery. We'll have 3 operating rooms, minimally invasive surgery, and we will also have a special room that will be a special cath lab and operating room. Okay, so we'll be able to do some very interesting, innovative things. And the market really is not just our domestic market, but the international market.
When you measure the growth of your organization over the last 26 years, what do you attribute this growth to?
Some people might say stupidity, but I think we've identified needs and tried to fill the voids. You know what I mean? And maybe we hang our baskets a little too high sometimes, and we try to fill it at the highest possible level. But that's what I think our people deserve. If my mother were to get ill, God forbid, I'd like to know that the facility that we provide for her is the best that's available, and the same for your mother. You see what I'm saying? So you never know when you're going to become the patient, as quite a few of our leaders have determined. And so when you prepare, what they say, when you dig one hole, make sure you dig one for you too. But at the same time, I think the general idea is to just make sure that what we do it with excellence in mind. And so that if somebody wants to travel, it's an option, it's a prerogative, it's not a necessity.
You're talking about excellence. You're driven by excellence.
Absolutely.
I'm sure. But your mother worked with you
for 25 of the 26 years.
for 25 years.
Right, and it's only because we allowed Dr. France, who was an orthodontist here years ago, and we gave him 1 year's notice
You decided
to
that
find somebody else.
you retired your mother after 25 years.
But she wouldn't call it retirement, but we brought her to, oh, you mean from 25 years ago, or you mean now?
No, from the facility.
Yeah, well, she was working with Dr. Franz at the time, and they got along splendidly well. And when I came home, I said, "Now, this got to fix, right? So you gotta move to the rail home. So give him 1 year's notice."
You've been able to also grow this facility because of the increase, Dr. Brown, in non-communicable diseases in the country.
Oh, well, I mean, that's been literally pandemic and raging.
The lifestyle of Bahamians really caused you to build a tremendous facility, because if you didn't have the need, or if people didn't have the need for the services, you would not have been able to provide the services.
There would have been no reason to build it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so let's speak to the incidence of the increase in heart problems in the country, renal failure, all of these things.
I'll go back to heart, because that's one where we have irrefutable evidence, so to say. And I go back to one of our senior colleagues, as Dr. Beneby would say, one of our senior colleagues, in Dr. John Lunn. In the late 60s, early 70s, Dr. Lunn did a study at Princess Margaret Hospital in the RAN, what's it called, the RAN morgue, where they looked at 500 serial autopsies that were done, okay? And to determine why they died, which is what you do an autopsy for in the first place. And what they were able to determine was that less than, I think the number is ridiculously small, that less than 2% of these 500 deaths, 500 people, I don't know over what period of time, but less than 2 to 5% of these people had any evidence of heart disease due to atherosclerosis. Now, what they did find was that we had hypertensive heart disease, okay, and that there was evidence of diabetes and so on. But in terms of our big killer today, which is atherosclerotic heart disease, where you have coronary artery disease, blockages from cholesterol in the vessels, you end up with angina, you end up with heart attacks, you end up with sudden death, and so on and so forth. That has rung home too closely for too many of us. Then we went from essentially zero in 1970 to our #1 killer for the last several years.
And the #1 killer is?
Heart disease, predominantly from coronary artery disease, which is strictly a lifestyle phenomenon.
Yes.
Because we didn't change our genetics in the last 30 years. Okay? So we go from where our autopsies, where the pathologist was able to confirm that we did not have heart disease, and then our lifestyle changed with the supposedly new affluence of the Bahamian nation and so on, and the advent of remote control TVs and fancy cars and so on and so forth, and fast foods, not eating all the fresh fruits and vegetables and all the processed foods and so on and so forth. So our lifestyle changed towards the westernized lifestyle, and so there's a statement I used to make that some people found offensive. So we'll just say, if you live like a Westerner, you die like a Westerner. And let's just leave it at that. And so, but now you can hardly find people that don't have evidence of coronary disease.
You can hardly find people.
I mean, because it's such a prevalent condition.
Yes.
We lose literally 25% of our people to heart disease. That's
Yes.
a lot of people.
Yes.
And that's your leading killer. So when you take all your cancers and add them up, they don't touch
So
heart.
most families in the Bahamas have been impacted by coronary heart disease.
They've been affected by somebody dying a cardiac death. It may not necessarily be coronary artery, but that's the biggest culprit. And then, of course, hypertensive heart disease. And for some people, even alcohol-induced heart disease, drinking too much. And you can, of course, damage your heart and get what's called a cardiomyopathy and so on. So, but the biggest boys are lifestyle inflicted.
You are, Dr. Brown, making money from
Be careful how you say
people
this in public
who are you rather than giving a service of people, you are really making money from people living badly.
I would like to say that our profession involves taking care of those who may not have taken very good care of themselves, who may have lived a less than healthy lifestyle, and they have these afflictions, and once they have them, somebody has to help take care of them. So yes, we get charged with doing that, both from the cardiac perspective and from the cancer perspective, our two biggest killers, not just here in the Bahamas, but also in the rest of the Caribbean. That's how we ended up down south, being asked to build a heart center and a cancer center, because then number one and number two killers again are, for some of the islands, cancer, then heart, and for most of the others, heart, then cancer, just like in the Bahamas.
What responsibility do you have as an organization, the Pavilion, to teach people so that they do not have to come to you
I think
for these services?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that is the most awesome responsibility, is to help to prevent, to encourage prevention of these illnesses. There's just no way there's any country in the world that can keep up with the chronic non-communicable diseases and the treatment of them. You just can't keep up with that. That's a very low yield proposition.
So we have an epidemic in this country, don't we?
I'm sorry?
There's an epidemic of...
There's an epidemic in this hemisphere.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And very much concentrated in the Caribbean. And that is being determined, very much concentrated in the Caribbean. And we don't have the resources to deal with this. So we really have to get our countries, our populations educated from so high onwards, if not before conception. Okay? Because our practices are just deleterious to our health. The good part is that we don't smoke a lot. That's about the only thing we don't do a lot of. We don't smoke. And God help us if we were to be heavy smokers, because then our cancer rates, like you don't see a lot of lung cancer in the Caribbean period, unless we have expatriates moving in. And when I see a Bahamian smoking, I ask them where they went to school in the States. Because we just don't usually, get to be careful, smoking cigarettes, okay? But so we are fortunate in that we don't smoke a lot, so we don't see the additive amount of heart disease and cancers relative to smoking. But boy, we sure make up for it with the other bad boys.
Let's take a break here, and when we return, I want to talk a little bit about cancer and what your organization is doing in terms of cancer treatment in the country. We take this final break on the platform with Dr. Conville Brown. We'll come right back. We're back here in the final segment of our program, The Platform, and we continue our conversation with Dr. Conville Brown. And Dr. Brown, some years ago as a reporter, I did a story on Bahamians who had difficulties getting cancer treatment in the Bahamas, radiation, that type of thing. I believe that you have created a facility to make it a little easier for people to get that type treatment at home, both radiation and chemotherapy?
Radiation in particular, we have the capability of delivering radiation therapy and chemotherapy, but the government has at their oncology center the ability to deliver chemotherapy. And so for the most part, government patients will receive their chemotherapy at Princess Margaret Hospital, and I imagine probably at the Rand as well. The radiation component is that high-level, high-tech, advanced component that is phenomenally expensive to set up and to maintain. It's a very expensive operation to run. And that's what we set about doing in 2002 when we did the second expansion on the pavilion. And that's where a bunch of us doctors got together, with a few private sector people, got together and literally invested just under 15 million in establishing the cancer center with a state-of-the-art radiation therapy center. It was actually the first at its level in the Caribbean.
And that is working extremely well, isn't it?
Well, we keep it working extremely well to the point that we actually have, we're the only center outside of North America that has American College of Radiation Oncology accreditation. And we're very proud of that because we just got it again for the fourth time for a 3-year period. So in our entire existence now, which is, oh Lord, from 2004 to now is what, 12 years? We've had accreditation for 10 of the 12. The first 2 years is what they use for your assessment. Yeah, you cannot get it under 2 years.
And you've flown people into the country to perform various services for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, and you still do that?
Not as much because we have resident staff. We have full-time resident staff for the cancer center, but there's always some specialists that we would still wish to access every now and again, and so we have no difficulty reaching out and collaborating. And so that's what we do. We're starting a very robust cancer research program as well. And we have one of the world leaders that has joined us. He's stationed in Antigua, but provides the service here as well.
But you have equipment change from time to time, and certain modalities, they change?
Yes. You have to keep updating, yeah. You have to keep updating. And this is one of the things that keeps it relatively expensive, is because you can't just pay it and then don't worry about it. You have to stay with the times and keep updating.
You've been able to keep this facility at a state-of-the-art condition because of the ability of people to pay. Insurance companies here work very well for you, don't they?
Let me put it to you like this. If the patient says, I will have my care in the Bahamas, then, and they're insured, then yes, the insurance companies work relatively well with us. But there is still, and you'll hear a lot of this with the talk with NHI and with National Health Insurance and so on, that one of the things that will be mandated is that a lot of the care, before you look outside, you need to make sure it's not available inside, because we still have a tremendous efflux of patients, particularly insured patients, outside of the Bahamas for care, not just for cancer care, but for all sorts of care. And listen, it's a free market, and I think people deserve the freedom to do what they wish. Unfortunately, I think on some occasions, some of the insurance companies are guilty of actually encouraging the export of care.
But isn't it true that some people die because they are unable to afford the services?
Absolutely, and that's why the role that we make sure we put ourselves in is to make sure that we improve access as much as possible. And the way for us to do that is to not be a Donald Trump with those kind of financial resources, but to try to lower the cost so that the government patient or the patient who is not insured nor can afford private care, and again, we're celebrating 26 years of this, so that those patients who are not insured, cannot afford private care, can still access our services, okay, albeit at a substantially discounted price, in excess of 50%.
I want to ask you, how do your prices compare with those in South Florida?
They don't compare. You can, and the reason I say they don't compare is because we've all heard it, not only on the news, but even in American politics right this minute. The most expensive healthcare system in the world is the U.S. The most expensive. And not always with the maximum, with the best outcomes, but but definitely the most expensive system in the world. So it's easy to be less expensive than the U.S. And apart from that, all of the attendant costs that go with having to travel away, especially if it's for cancer, you could be gone for 10 weeks. And so that's another home you have to set up.
You have taken a leap that is phenomenal, and that leap was to establish a facility in Antigua. And I remember seeing the photographs of the current Prime Minister at the official opening of the medical pavilion in Antigua. Why Antigua?
It was not my idea again. I'd love to be able to take credit for it, but it's not my idea. I was invited to a CARICOM meeting to give a talk on the role of the private sector in healthcare, given some of the things we had done in the Bahamas. And at that meeting, it was chaired by Prime Minister Spencer, who was the Prime Minister for Antigua at the time. And when he heard about our cancer center here and how it provided radiation for all Bahamians, because if you're insured, you walk through the door. If you're self-paying private, you walk through the door. If you're not, you go to Princess Margaret, and Princess Margaret will refer you for radiation should you need it. So there should be no Bahamian that should be denied access to radiation therapy in our Bahamas since 2004, 2005. So when he heard this, what was critical for him was that the government didn't come up with one penny, that this was all done privately, and yet the government was offered the service for its constituents at less than half the cost of the service for the rest of the regular community. So he was immediately attracted to the idea, and he says, Dr. Brown, would you consider building a cancer center like the one you have in the Bahamas and a heart center for us here in Antigua? And I said, well, sir, we have 350,000 people in the Bahamas, and albeit apart from the fact that some of them still go to the U.S., I don't think your population of 80,000 could support that level of investment. And he says, Doc, you don't understand. I want you to build it in Antigua, but for the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. That's 9 countries and 600,000 to 700,000 people. I said, okay, well, with a couple of provisos, if you commit for your government to use it for its patients, and for you to get the other governments to make the same commitment, then you have yourself a deal, and it will all make sense. But if it's going to be for one island or 2 islands, then it becomes a white albatross and a significant financial loss to whoever invests in that facility. And so that's how the facility came about. We didn't choose Antigua.
They were able to do that, to get all of the governments to
we got all of the governments
support?
to agree. In fact, that was the first time I actually presented at a heads of government meeting. So we've done that a couple of times, and we got all of the governments to agree because it's one of their biggest killers, and they had no services whatsoever. Everybody had to fly. And so we got everybody to agree. We got the center built. By the time it was finished, 7 of the 9 governments had changed. Okay? So one of the things we're having to do now is to just go back and reacquaint all of the governments. But what has not changed is that cancer is still the #1 or #2 killer. And they still don't have resources outside of the Cancer Center Eastern Caribbean. So we now have each of the governments literally signing contracts with us. And by the end of this month, I fly back down later this week, but by the end of this month, we expect to actually have about 5 of the 9 governments contracted. You can't just do this by an understanding. It really has to be contracted, because that's the only thing that will transcend a change of government. And
Conville Brown started out as a cardiologist.
Still.
Yes, you're still a cardiologist, but much more than that now, because you are a medical entrepreneur, and you started out in a little office. Today you have this pavilion offering all of these services, and you have been able to attract other physicians and other healthcare professionals into that organization. What is the size of the organization in terms of manpower?
In Nassau, there's about 50 at this point, and that number is going to go up within the next 6 to 12 months again. But there's about 50 now, and has been for the past several years. So I'm sure you would appreciate how fearful it can become payday. You know,
Yes, absolutely.
Because these are specialist folks, so they're not inexpensive.
Yes.
And then of course, we have Sunrise in Freeport. That's a group of physicians again. I just happen to be one of the principals in the group, but a group of physicians there, and we have several employees there. So we still are responsible for a number of households.
Is it stressful for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's what I do. It's what I do. It's what I enjoy doing, and nothing puts a smile on my face more than delivering care and seeing somebody get better.
I go back to government again, because in a small developing country like the Bahamas, a facility such as yours requires support from the state in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I think that should be the model. The model should be that there should be a partnership, and some people call it a public-private partnership. If this were just done by the private sector alone, the cost would be, we're not the first people to do this, by the way. Others have done it. Mm-hmm. What they have not done is reduce the cost for the government patient to have access, okay, as much as we have done so. There may be a little discount here and there, but we've actually made it our intrinsic model for that to happen. And I think that's really the way forward for developing countries. And we've actually published this in the medical literature, and you can actually find it online under our partnered care model. So a number of other countries are adopting this concept, and we're looking to actually go outside of our region into the more global region with this, because it really enhances the ability of countries to deliver care in their own local environment by building local capacity. Because that's much more sustainable than running a travel agency and jumping on a plane and flying to an expensive environment.
How would national health insurance impact your facility?
Yeah, go on.
And would it alleviate some of the stressful conditions that you have?
I think so. You know, I'm very excited about the opportunity of national health insurance, because the most frustrating thing that every doctor who works in the public system, private system not so much, but every doctor who works in the public system, one of the things that we will see is that not everybody can afford the care that they need. Okay? Mm-hmm. That's from a professional perspective alone, forget compassion. From a professional perspective, that's very, very frustrating. Okay? Because you now cannot deliver that which you've been trained to do, and that's which hopefully you entered the profession to do. From a financial perspective, it is also less rewarding, but if you just stick to the professional side of it and the compassionate side of it, you can see where that can become very frustrating. So what national health insurance will do is it will put in place a financing mechanism to assist those who before could not assist themselves. Okay, so now everybody has access, or should have access, hence the term universal access, and we're now much better situated to be able to do that, which most of us say that's what we want to do. Surgeons want to cut, but if the guy can't afford the surgery, the surgeon can't operate.
Have you ever been told that you are over-ambitious?
Yeah, probably by my wife. But no, seriously. I don't think I've been told that I'm over-ambitious. I know I had one very good physician friend who said to me, Dr. Brown, you are a madman. I won't tell you, but you can tell it's a foreign accent, right? Mm-hmm. That lives here. Or I should say an expatriate accent. And he says, I'm a madman. He says, I love what you're doing, I respect what you're doing, but I'm not crazy enough to have taken it on to do it. And,
well, that's a good kind of crazy.
I think it's a reasonably good kind of crazy, because we've been able to introduce a lot of services, and I'm very, very proud in my 25th and 26th year to be able to say that we have actually put services in place that have saved lives.
I think Bahamians are proud of what you have accomplished. I don't know of too many physicians who have been able to do what you have done in such a short period of time. And we again warmly congratulate you on what you have done for the advancement of medicine in our country.
Well, thank you very much.
And every single award that you have gotten over the years, I think you deserve every single one. So thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for those kind words.
Congratulations.
Pleasure, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening to our program today. And once again, we wish Dr. Brown and his medical pavilion both here in the Bahamas and Antigua and Sunrise in Grand Bahama. We wish them well as they continue to provide the services to the Bahamian people. And is in this their 26th anniversary? On
our 26th anniversary, and by the way, I should say, and Domica's going to kill me, tomorrow we are celebrating with a health fair to help people on the path to wellness, so that they don't need our services in the future. And so
where is that going to be?
It's going to be at the Medical Pavilion between 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock.
Okay.
And we're looking at the overall health of the patient, so it's not just your physical health, but your mental health, your financial health. So we even have some financial advisors on board. So come by, get your blood pressure checked, your cholesterol, your weight, see how it matches up with your height, and so on and so forth. So we're looking at wellness, education.
And you can get all these things done for free, right?
Strictly for free. Strictly for free.
Very good.
With lots of educational material as well.
Good. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to our program. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.